Okay, thank you everybody. I'm so excited to present to you my capstone project today. We are going to be talking about the economic and ecological valuation of the North Fork of the South Platte River. I also want to note that today is Veterans Day, so thank you veterans for your service. Just want to give a quick overview of what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to start with our my project partner, Mountain Area Land Trust, their connection to the problem and a quick overview of the problem. Talk about our stakeholders, Bailey, Colorado, and Denver Water. And Denver Water leads into the Blue River Decree, which is talking about some water law in Colorado. We'll then get into my survey description and results, which then leads us into our bigger project scope and potential recommendations for project continuation. So my project partner was Mountain Area Land Trust. They're based out of Evergreen, Colorado. They were established in 1992. They primarily facilitate conservation easements along the Front Range, as well as fee title acquisitions. A conservation easement is defined as a voluntary legal agreement that permanently limits uses of the land in order to protect its conservation values. They primarily work in the 6-county service area along the Front Range, Park County being where our project is located, being one of them. Additionally, they work in Boulder, Clear Creek, Gilpin, Jefferson, and Teller counties. At this time, they have 87 conservation easements with over 23,000 acres of total protected land, and 207 of which of those acres are owned directly by MALT. So they were really just the project connection here. They strive to develop strong relationships with their easement holders, and 2 of them who have properties along the North Fork of the South Platte had been expressing concern about flows in the river that run through their properties. These easement holders run fly fishing businesses, and their businesses have been disrupted from this problem. And up until this point, MALT has not had the capacity to take on this problem and project. And thankfully, our partnership has allowed that with this capstone project. So I'm going to give a quick overview of the problem. It is pretty complex. There's lots of little pieces. Essentially, this small mountain town of Bailey, Colorado, has been struggling economically due to the flows in the river. The North Fork is supplemented by Roberts Tunnel, which pumps water from the Dillon Reservoir on the western slope under the Continental Divide and outputs into the North Fork. We'll go into more about Roberts Tunnel and that operation, but essentially in the last 10, 15 years, the tunnel's operations haven't been as consistent, and the tunnel will get shut off, and the supplemented flow into the river will quickly decline. It really plummets, and it killed off the fish populations in the stream, which then affects the fly fishing businesses, which causes the ripple effect into the local community and their economy. It's a pretty small community, it's a small mountain town, and so it really does take a hit. So our project was to better understand that relationship between the levels of stream flow and the local economy. We understood that there were people who were upset about this problem and wanted to take a really biased stance of understanding what was really happening, all the players involved, and to see if that relationship was actually true. So to get a little bit of area familiarity, this is a zoomed in map of the valley that we're going to be discussing. On the far west side of the map, you'll see the Roberts Tunnel outlet. It's just west of Grant. The North Fork runs right along the highway, Highway 285, and through the town of Bailey. Bailey is where the most populated, Bailey is where majority of the population live. A lot of people have properties along the North Fork in the valley as well, like near Shawnee. So this is kind of an idea of what we're looking at as we're moving forward. Also, to give another visual representation of what's actually happening, is this is the level of die-off that happens when the river plummets. On the left, obviously, is a giant pile of dead fish. And on the right, those arrows are pointing to fish that have been struggling in the creek. And these were provided by a fishing guide that I'd been in contact with and had interviewed throughout this project as well. I do also want to note that a lot of these businesses and private landowners have taken it upon themselves to restock the stream every time these fish kills happen, and it can cost anywhere, they've reported up to $100,000 per restock event, which happens about once a year. So there are some people who are really taking on this financial burden, and we're hoping to find a solution that could potentially help lessen that burden and help them kind of create a more sustainable income, sustainable economy for the community, as well as a sustainable ecosystem for the fish. So I'm going to clump Bailey, Colorado with all of our stakeholders. It sits right off of Highway 285, about 50 miles southwest of Denver, making it super accessible for the city of Denver, as well as people flying in from other states or other countries even. It's a really easy drive to get there. It consists of about 10,000 residents, which is actually about half of the population of Park County. So making it a pretty significant economic community because they're so heavily dependent on recreational tourism, and that's really all they have kind of going on, makes this project really important for the county as well. So like I said, the North Fork runs right along Grant. This is also a really great recreational spot because it sits right next to Pike National Forest, as well as the Lost Creek Wilderness. So there's tons of trails. There's a couple 14ers that happen nearby. The town of Bailey also hosts an annual bike race called the Hundo, and it's a 100-mile bike race that lots of people will come through and recreate in the town of Bailey. To give a better understanding of the recreation economy in the state of Colorado, the state brings in about $37 billion annually in just the recreation economy, and it supports about 19% of all jobs in the state. So there's about 100 businesses in the township of Bailey and along the valley, and the majority of those are recreational businesses. So again, our goal was to better understand that relationship. So next we have our other stakeholder, Denver Water. They're a pretty huge stakeholder. They hold a lot of power. It is the oldest and largest water utility in the state. It's considered a public utility, but early voters, when it was first established, decided to keep their water services separate from local politics. So Denver Water users pay for tap fees and water rates instead of through their taxes. Since Denver Water's establishment, they swiftly gained senior water rights across the Front Range and just over the Continental Divide as well, buying out large swaths of land and quickly developing these large reservoirs and diversion systems to provide for their users. It really does own up to the term first in time, first in right. Water laws in Colorado are really, really complicated. This project really just hits the surface on that level of understanding and that level of implication that it is really putting on these towns and these communities and Denver Water itself and the types of constraints that they have towards their diversions and uses. So Roberts Tunnel also is a big factor here. You've heard me mention it before. It was constructed in 1963 and it pumps water from Dillon Reservoir, which sits just west of the Continental Divide, under the Continental Divide, and outputs into the North Fork. When they constructed this tunnel, they dredged the entire North Fork up into the South Platte. So it took away all of that ecosystem, normal bends, riffles, pools in the river that normally occur were gone. There had been a natural flow level in the North Fork before this construction, and since then it's been really disrupted. There's even portions of the stream along the North Fork along the highway that break into two, which make this problem even a little bit more nuanced of like, well, which part are the fish going in? Like, where are people fishing? So it's makes this even a harder problem if you're spreading out the water even further. So the tunnel operations vary depending on season as well as demand for downstream water users. Typically, more water users want more water in the summers to water their lawns, wash their cars, whatever it might be, and less so in the winter. So a lot of the operations are very seasonally dependent and affect how these people are running their businesses off of the stream when they're guiding and fly fishing. Another constraint is the Blue River Decree. The water coming out of Roberts Tunnel should be seen as a supplemental source. And that was a really big realization throughout this project to better understand like what these constraints were, but we'll talk about the Blue Water Decree in just a bit. To give a visualization of all of this that's happening, this is a pretty comprehensive map of the collection system that Denver Water operates. Some key things to look at here are the black dotted line, which is the Continental Divide. We have Dillon Reservoir highlighted in the light blue. That's the collection system there. And the Dillon Reservoir and that collection system feed into the Blue River. And the Blue River is one of the first headwaters to the Colorado River. And the Colorado River is a whole nother can of worms that we will also talk about soon. But essentially that water coming up and over, you can see Roberts Tunnel highlighted in light blue, is Colorado River water, and it has that priority first. Also, to give another understanding, nearly 50% of the water that water users use in Denver and Colorado Springs comes from the western slope, and the other 50% come from the South Platte River watershed, which is highlighted in light yellow there. Another fun fact about Colorado, the state is pretty much split almost in half with the Front Range and the western slope, and 80% of the precipitation happens on the western slope and only 20% happens on the Front Range. So they're very dependent on that water that's coming up and over the Continental Divide. Okay, the Blue River Decree is very complicated. It was established in 1946 and has since been litigated pretty much constantly. It was established primarily and with the priority of water use for municipality, domestic, mechanical, manufacturing, fire protection, street sprinkling, and watering for use within the Denver water system. If it's used outside of these purposes, those diversions would then be reduced or even reallocated. The Blue River Decree essentially just says that the water has to meet the needs of, I always forget the name. Sorry. The Green Mountain Reservoir. It was located in the map before. It has to meet the needs of the Green Mountain Reservoir and fill that to capacity before it can be diverted elsewhere. So that is another huge constraint that we need to take into consideration when thinking about the solutions for this problem. Denver Water has typically used this as almost like a shield and kind of to hide behind of like, oh, we can't do anything with Roberts Tunnel because of the Blue River Decree. But then they haven't been effective in communicating exactly why this is happening or what the Blue River Decree means. And the people of Bailey who are fed this information are really, really frustrated. And because it's their livelihoods at stake, like they are really invested, they're extremely emotional. They want to be able to sustain their businesses, their families, the community. And this was a huge piece for me to understand. I still, again, it's a surface level understanding, just trying to be like, okay, how can I synthesize this in this most straightforward way possible, because we're going to be presenting to the stakeholders next week, and we want to be able to communicate this. And another thing we were hoping to achieve from this project was to try to mend the relationship between Denver Water and the stakeholders in Bailey, because that relationship has been really tumultuous. And it's really just this lack of communication, this lack of shared knowledge, which is super important when addressing these conservation issues. Okay, so we've given a good understanding, a good foundation of our project, of the area, its stakeholders, and the problem that's happening in the region. Again, going back to our initial focus was to better understand that relationship between the flow and the economy. We wanted to develop a survey to have that hard data of knowing what was happening. And we wanted to see what that relationship actually looked like. So I developed a survey, an economic survey that consisted of 28 questions that was really focused towards the business owners in the Bailey area. The questions were divided up into ecological, economic, and demographic questions. It included questions to ask the type of business the surveyor operates, whether they're primarily in guiding or are they a restaurant, things like that. We wanted to know their connection to the river, where a guiding business would have a primary connection to the river and a restaurant might have a secondary connection to the river. We also asked questions about their estimated yearly revenues, which was hard to really quantify. We'll get into that next. We also wanted to ask questions about their perception of the river ecology and effects of flow rates in relation to the economy. So if they notice, hey, I think business has kind of been slow lately, and then they also notice at the same time that the flows were kind of low as well, to see if they had that perception of that connection. All of the questions that we asked were completely voluntary. They were not mandatory to answer. And it took anywhere between 1 to 10 minutes to complete. It was an online survey. We also did hand out hard copies if people didn't want to take it online. So myself and Ellie, who works at Mattinaria Land Trust, went door to door in Bailey and handed out these flyers that had a QR code on it, as well as a URL. So we handed it to the businesses, their owners, whoever was there to be able to take it. Additionally, we had an email list that I had gathered from attending a public meeting by Denver Water early in the summer, and sent an email with the survey as well. So we're knowingly distributed the survey to 49 individuals, and we had an 81% response rate, which is really huge. But I do want to note that there is a potential variability in this response rate, because you don't know who someone might have forwarded that email or handed off the flyer to someone else that they thought might be interested in also completing the survey. So it is important to note that level of variability and unknown. So here are some quick survey results. Our survey findings reported a decrease in business in relation to decrease in flows in the stream. So there was a direct correlation between the flows and the business. So I'll just kind of go through and read these. 80% strongly agreed that flows in the river are important to them. 78 expressed extreme concern about the flow of the river. 86 strongly agreed that river recreation was an important part of the economy. 78% responded yes to losing customers during the low flow events. And then of that 78%, 32% of those individuals indicated they lost 100 or more customers during each low flow event. So that's a really significant amount of people. And then 76 strongly agreed that when the river is flowing and healthy, their business is good. So we did find that direct correlation through our survey questions. And these were kind of the few that I thought stood out the most. And these respondent rates are really huge. This also just shows that numerical value. As I mentioned before, it was really difficult to estimate that exact numerical loss from individuals. From this question, we asked how much revenue on average would you estimate was lost from a singular low flow event? There's a huge range, anywhere from $1,000 to over $30,000. But from this question here, we we're able to equate that roughly $660,000 were lost at least from a low flow event. And this does not include, as I've mentioned, restocking fees that some individuals have taken upon themselves. This is just from this question that we generated, these numbers. But in a follow-up write-up question, respondents were asked to estimate their yearly loss over the last 5 years, and it ranged anywhere from $1,000 to nearly $1 million. And that really just kind of compounded that, that challenge to be able to estimate in the community, is this something that is making a huge impact. This next slide is one of my favorite comparisons from our data analysis. The top graph shows percent respondents by month when asked the question, in what month do you do the most business? Obviously, there's a clear drop off in the winter because it's a high elevation mountain town. It does get very snowy. People don't really want to fish. Their recreation dwindles. But they do have a pretty long recreation season from early spring to late fall. The bottom graph there is a gauge flow data taken from the North Fork at Bailey. And it really does equate to the businesses when they're most busy. And what I want to point out here is, as you see in October 21 and October 22, CFS will drop down to nearly 0. This is when the tunnel closures are unexpected, and it really, this is where the biggest hits happen to the local community. Because if you look in October, in the graph above, they're still having tons of business, they're still thriving, but when these tunnel closures happen, it completely disrupts that. So being able to compare the water levels to the business levels is some of the most significant data we can understand to seek solutions that can best serve the community as well as the ecosystem. In addition to my survey, I conducted 4 interviews with land and business owners to gain their perspective of the problem. The interviews were semi-structured, where I had the same set of questions for each interview, but allowed for a free-form questions to occur to facilitate more of a conversation with these individuals. Each interview was recorded with permission and later transcribed, which is where I got these quotes here. And each of the interviewees had been working and living in Bailey for over 10 years. So they had been able to see the changes that had been occurring over the last 10 to 20 years in the region. Okay, so in addition to learning the background of the stakeholders, developing my survey, conducting interviews, we frequently had meetings throughout the project. I would meet bi-weekly with Dawson. I would meet bi-weekly with my project partners. I had meetings with other stakeholders. I attended Denver Water public hearing meetings, and it felt like almost every single week there was a twist and turn in my project, much like that of a riverbed. So we finally had a meeting set up with Denver Water after we had developed our survey, analyzed some of the data. We wanted to start this relationship with Denver Water. I was able to get a contact from an employee there through a networking event that I attended in the summer. And we wanted to present to them some of our initial findings of the survey. So when this project had started, our goal was to develop this survey, get the data back, and see if we could present that economic information to Denver Water to try and advocate for management changes in Roberts Tunnel. If they could just leave the tunnel running at a very minimum CFS, like a minimum in-stream flow, it would keep the fish healthy and alive, which then would keep the businesses alive. A similar project had been done in the Roaring Fork Valley on near Aspen. My project partner, Jeannie, who's the executive director at Mountain Area Land Trust, was involved in this project in the Roaring Fork, and they had great success. Obviously different components at play, different, it's a whole different situation, but advocating for in-stream flow, they were able to make it happen. So that was our goal when we went to meet with Denver Water to start that relationship, be like, hey, here's some quick snippets of what we gathered. But again, another huge bend in the project. The representative we met with was extremely informational, very understanding, very kind. And he took his time to explain to us the constraints that Denver Water had on them. And that goes back to the Blue River Decree, that goes back to a lot of the water laws in Colorado. He helped us gain a better understanding and a clearer understanding of those constraints and of those management constraints. So our biggest takeaway from this conversation with him was the additive of climate change and severe drought in the West that put further constraints on Denver Water, as well as the Colorado River watershed that is severely struggling right now. And subsequently, this puts constraints on Denver water users, Colorado spring water users, and then Bailey, Colorado. They're really just taking a hit from this huge problem, and they're a small ripple effect that's occurring. So in addition to that, the combined with the shrinking snowpack in the Rockies, it makes for diversion of that water from Dillon Reservoir a lot tighter than it had been in the last 20 years. One of these facts that I had done some research on was the snowpack in the Rockies has declined 20% since 1980. So that's 40 years ago. But seeing those effects 20, 15, 10 years, and even now is a huge problem. So after having this meeting with Denver Water, we really had to take a step back and understanding the scope of this project and approach it with more of a systems thinking approach. It wasn't going to be a simple solution of, hey, Denver Water, can you just turn the water on in Roberts Tunnel? Everything will be great. It's a much bigger problem than that. It led us to having to think creatively about what type of solutions we were going to provide for these stakeholders. We no longer were going to present in front of Denver Water in a more formal setting. We had to rethink about what our end deliverables were for my Capstone project for Mountain Area Land Trust. It was an amazing meeting, but it happened like 6 or 8 weeks before this presentation. So it was really a lot to kind of comprehend, and I think it was a good challenge to really show the effects of conservation right now in the West. But it was something, this project turned into something that was not going to be easily solvable for us at Mountain Area Land Trust and here at CSU. So to give a visual representation of the scale of this issue, this is a map of the Colorado River watershed. It encompasses 6 states and 2 countries and provides water to nearly 40 million people across the West. So Bailey is this very, very small piece just west of Denver there that unfortunately is experiencing the burden of this massive climate change water issue. So we sat and thought and brainstormed about potential recommendations, potential project solutions. These are a couple of the things that we came up with, but really what it came down to was Mountain Area Land Trust, again, does not have the capacity to fully take this project on and continue forward with it. And it has a lot of momentum and space that it could grow. So we wanted to establish a foundation for the community members, for the stakeholders, to be able to give them, so they have this foundation to build off. We want what's best for them. They want what's best for them. What that's going to be sustainable long term, something that's hopefully financially achievable and something that someone is willing to take on. So our first recommendation is to do a full 11-mile stream restoration. So as I mentioned before, when Denver Water built the tunnel, they dredged the stream. It took away all of that really good natural habitat for the fish and the ecology. Some individuals in the region, some of those private landowners have taken it upon themselves to do smaller stream restorations on their properties, but it's nowhere near where it should or could be to provide that really good habitat for the fish populations. So there are some avenues they could take to allow for grant applications for funding, partner organizations that might want to get involved. There's just a couple of different ways that they could go with that. The next option is purchasing or leasing junior water rights. This is a costly legal route, and it's really a short-term solution because some of these diversions, essentially, if you have a junior water right to divert water out of the stream, you could take legal action to keep that water in the stream instead of being penalized for not using it for your diversion. Going back again to the first in time, first in right, or sorry, use it or lose it, excuse me. The use it or lose it phrase for water rights in Colorado, if you're not diverting for your junior water rights on your private property, the state does keep track of that. And if you're keeping it in the stream, they'll give that water right to somebody else. So that's why there's a lot of issues. It's so super convoluted across the entire state. But anyway, going this route, you could temporarily put more water into the creek, but it's not a long-term solution. It'd be very costly. You'd have to get water lawyers involved. It may be a couple individuals taking this option. The next would be a request for water application with the Colorado Water Trust. Colorado Water Trust is a nonprofit organization that works with larger scale projects. We actually did have a meeting with a representative from there, and he was saying their organization was willing to take on a project like this. But again, that's up to Colorado Water Trust and the stakeholders in Bailey, and not something that we can decide for them. But they also have been working with the state of Colorado's in-stream flow program. The Colorado Water Conservation Board through the Department of Natural Resources has this in-stream flow program. I actually just had read about it like the last few weeks. And it's essentially a way to give rights to streams and to give rights to maintain a minimum stream flow in creeks that have been diverted so much that they've run dry. So working with Colorado Water Trust could be an option for our stakeholders to continue this project and work with a larger organization that is able to have the capacity and ability to support them. And then the last option, it was kind of a creative thing that I came up with. It doesn't have any scientific proof that this is a possibility, but I thought it might be a fun idea. If people wanted, a private landowner wanted to create a retention pond, if they knew that a shutoff was happening, they could collect some fish from the stream, put them in this retention pond, hopefully keep them alive, put them back in the stream. It's a way to possibly prevent a 100% fish kill, as some individuals had reported previously. So next week when we have our stakeholder meeting, we're going to present these options to them. Hopefully they'll give us some feedback. I'm really excited to hear what they have to say. We're going to have a member of the Colorado Water Trust present at this meeting as well, so they can help answer questions. They have a very deep understanding, very broad understanding of the water laws in Colorado, where we just have the surface level understanding. So for project continuation, I've kind of mentioned a couple of these things. We're really excited to present our data and our findings to the stakeholders in Bailey. I'm honestly a little bit nervous because a lot of the initial communications we've had with these stakeholders they just want the water turned on and they don't see the bigger picture. And I think it's going to be a challenging conversation to say, hey, this isn't possible. This isn't something that Colorado or the Denver Water can really just change their management, you know, the flip of a switch. So I think it'll be a good conversation, but it's something going to be very challenging. So hopefully they can decide what's best for their community. I would love to see this project continue. I would love to see this project really grow into something. I think there's a lot of potential with the relationship with the Colorado Water Trust. They seem super excited. I know they talked about it in one of their like team meetings or group meetings. So there are possibilities for long-term sustainable solutions. This has been an incredible learning opportunity. I'm so excited for this to be culminating and finalizing. I want to say a thank you to my project partners at Mountain Area Land Trust. Ellie and Jeannie could not be with us today, but hopefully they'll watch this recording. They've been incredible partners and mentors. And thank you to CLTL. This has been an amazing program. This project, I could not be happier with how this project came out. I feel like I really hit on a lot of our key talking points throughout the school year and the learning process, and was able to fully implement them from working with stakeholders, from collaborating with people, coming up with climate change issues, thinking creatively, being adaptive, you know, all the buzzwords from CLTL. So I'm really happy with how this all came out, and thank you so much for attending.